Let's bring in our MSNBC political analysts now. Democratic strategist Basil Smikle, former George W. Bush White House aide Elise Jordan, and former Secretary of Housing and Urban Development Julian Castro.
Elise, I want to start with you. Trump is winning the popular vote, it seems, and if it holds, it would make him the first Republican to do that since your boss, George W., got it in 2004. What are your thoughts this morning about that?
It is a sweeping victory, a mandate of sorts, and we're seeing that with what's happening probably with the House and the Senate. Trump is going to go into office very empowered. He is picking up, a number of swing states that just analysts days ago did not think it was possible. It's going to be the story now is how does he use his mandate?
Basil, your top takeaways. What message did American voters send?
Well, a good chunk of the American voter wanted to take their country back, and we will soon see what that means. There are levels of sexism and racism that clearly a lot of people in this country are willing to tolerate, which is also something that, we may have woken up in the same country in a sense, but that becomes much more clear this morning. I would also say that there were conversations for over a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks about how black men weren't doing their part. Black people did their part and did everything they needed to do, including the black woman who ran. So this isn't, and going to a point that Mike Memoli had made earlier, this isn't a Democratic problem per se, because it's not a problem that can be solved with a campaign. These are deep-rooted issues in our country that we absolutely need to address. And frankly, I think that, and as we're talking about big D Democratic politics, the coalition that we had relied on is now 30 years old, and it has frayed. And that is something that I think as a party going forward, folks need to figure out what that coalition is going to look like.
Julian, your thoughts on that, because and I'm interested in Basil's part about a coalition that is frayed. How do you see it?
Well, I think that remains to be seen, right? We've seen other high watermarks for Republicans, George W. Bush getting about 44% of the vote. Reagan did well in the 1980s. There was a time when people thought of the Latino community as voters more as up for grabs, right? Then when Obama changed that a few years ago and got basically 73%, and then everybody started talking about the community as just Democrats. I think this election showed that they are more up for grabs. And I think the message that resonated was an economic message. Largely, the Latino community is diverse, obviously, different places and so forth, but it's basically a working class community and a very aspirational one. And Trump lies a lot. But one of the things he said in every speech was, when I was president, we had the greatest economy, the greatest economy, the greatest economy, and look what we have now with high gas prices and high grocery prices. And I think that enough people bought that. And we're going to spend a lot of time, I know, trying to untangle that. But fundamentally, I think that was the biggest factor with the community.
And back to Basil's point again, did the community do their part? Did the Latino community do their part in this election?
Yeah, I think this narrative is setting in that worries me somehow, that blames the Latino community. And I think that you got to give every community their agency, right? They're responding like anybody else would. On top of that, even if you believe the exit poll, 53% of Latinos supported Kamala Harris, right? And so it's still a majority and a governing positive part of the Democratic coalition. And I think that Democrats need to build on that and really, really understand what happened. They basically got to do the analog of what Republicans did after Romney lost in 2012. They did that autopsy to figure it out. Yeah. And Democrats, I think, need to figure that out.
I got to say, and this is not, and I want to be clear, this is not about finger pointing to specific communities. It's not. But there was finger pointing in saying that this community of black folk, black men in particular, but black people in general, what are we going to do? Are we going to get behind the candidate? And that happened. So my point is not so much.
But that was a discussion that happened in both sides of the aisle.
And there was some,
listen,
there was some growth that Trump saw in places like Wisconsin, right?
I have
with
no
members of the black community, black voters.
He was going to pick people off in different communities anyway. That's to be expected. But my point is that you know, over the last couple of weeks, we've been talking a lot about who's going to do their part. And the folks that need to do their part did their part. But I don't want to single anybody out. What I do want to single out is the fact that there was blatant racism and sexism in this campaign cycle. And my question is, what are we going to do about that? What are we going to do about the fact that that language was directed towards all of us at this table? Whether you're Latino, African American, or as a woman, the language that he used to define and describe Nancy Pelosi in the last day did not seem to matter. And no campaign and no party can really fix that until we find a way forward. And I think that, as you asked me about my takeaway, that to me is the root of all of this, that we have not addressed that core issue in our country.
So let me play some of what we heard from Donald Trump early this morning, before the official vote was called for him that he won this election. Here's what he said as part of his victory speech.
We're going to help our country heal. We're going to help our country heal. We have a country that needs help, and it needs help very badly. We're going to fix our borders. We're going to fix everything about our country.
Just a reminder, this is the man who lied about the results of the 2020 election, who's been accused of inciting an attack on the Capitol because of those lies, and who has called his political opponents the enemy from within. Elise, he wants to heal, he says. How can he do that?
On the positive side, if I'm going to try to say anything to look to the positive, when Trump feels like a winner, he usually is more controlled, and his behavior is more controlled, as you saw at the Republican National Convention. That it's when he feels under the worst attack that we see the absolute worst of him and what he's really made of. So let's hope there's a grace period as he basks in the victory.
But what does healing look like?
This country has so much to heal for so many years. I just hope everyone comes together and remembers we all want to have good lives for our family at the end of the day and a safe place.
Secretary, what does the vice president need to say today? What would your advice be to her?
Well, I think she needs to speak from the heart. And look, I think she was put in a very tough position by President Biden. I think that he should have, after the 22 midterms, he should have cleared the way. And I think she would have been in an even stronger position. I think she could have won that primary and had more time. In many ways, her campaign did a tremendous job with the circumstances that they had. Today is about, of course, acknowledging everybody who did work hard for her, acknowledging the vision that she had, and also, I hope, for my daughter, for other young women, reminding them that more of those cracks are in the glass ceiling, and to keep going and to try and inspire the young people of America, which she's done the entire campaign, and that she can continue to do.
Basil Smikle, Elise Jordan, former Secretary Julian Castro, thank you all.
Thank you.
I know it was a long night, early morning. Really appreciate getting your insights and your perspective on this race.